12-year-old Emily Carter had always been the bravest kid in the hospital's pediatric wing. Nurses often whispered about how she still smiled, even after months of grueling treatments that had stolen her energy, her hair, and most of her childhood. But on a quiet Tuesday evening, Emily's fight was seconds away from ending. The heart monitor beside her bed began to shriek, its red numbers tumbling fast into territory that even the most hopeful doctor would call hopeless. Dr. Hannah Brooks, who had been by Emily's side since the first diagnosis, stared helplessly at the screen, her chest tight with dread. The little girl who had taught the whole ward to believe in miracles now had barely 3 minutes left to live. Outside the ICU doors, Emily's golden retriever, Bailey, strained against his leash, his tail still for the first time anyone could remember. Bailey had been Emily's companion since she was 5, a soft, golden comfort who had curled up beside her through every fever, every restless night, and every painful procedure. Hospital rules kept animals out of the ICU, and for months, Bailey's visits had been limited to the common area. But tonight, something felt different. Emily's parents, Mark and Lisa, exchanged a glance that held both fear and desperate love. Breaking every rule they'd promised to follow, they led Bailey through the double doors into the place where only machines and whispered prayers stood between their daughter and death. As Bailey entered, the tension in the room shifted. The doctors and nurses froze, caught between duty and compassion, knowing what the rules said but also what their hearts felt. Emily's breathing was shallow, her chest barely rising beneath the hospital blanket. Her skin had taken on a frightening pallor, and her eyelids fluttered weakly, as if part of her had already started to drift away. Mark dropped to his knees beside the bed, his voice cracking as he whispered, "Emily, baby, look who's here." Bailey stepped closer, placing one gentle paw on the edge of the mattress. His brown eyes locked onto Emily's face with an intensity that made even Dr. Brooks forget her medical training for a moment. In the weeks before this night, the staff had noticed something remarkable whenever Bailey visited. Emily's heart rate would steady, her pain seemed to fade, and a spark returned to her tired eyes. No medicine had managed what Bailey's gentle presence could do. The nurses had started to call him Emily's guardian angel, half joking at first, but as days turned into months, their jokes turned into quiet belief. Even Dr. Brooks, who had spent 20 years in medicine, couldn't deny that the bond between the sick girl and her dog was something that science alone couldn't explain. Now, with alarms blaring and hope slipping away, Bailey did something no one had seen before. Instead of climbing onto the bed like he sometimes did, he pressed his head against Emily's chest, just over her failing heart. He let out a soft, broken wheezer sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. Emily's eyelids twitched, her lips parting slightly, as if she could hear him. The heart monitor's frantic beeping slowed just a fraction, enough to make Dr. Brooks catch her breath. Time felt like it stopped in that small room. Machines kept counting down the moments Emily had left, but everyone's eyes were fixed on Bailey. His breathing deepened, slow and steady, as though he was willing Emily to match him, to remember how to inhale and exhale when her own body had forgotten. Tears blurred Lisa's vision as she watched the dog that had once been Emily's playmate now become her lifeline. Mark reached out, resting a trembling hand on Bailey's back, silently begging him to keep going. Dr. Brooks had seen many things she couldn't explain in her career, but nothing like this. The golden retriever seemed to know exactly what was happening, as if every lab result, every scan, every grim prognosis had led to this single moment. Bailey's body trembled with effort, but his gaze never left Emily's face. His breaths came out in slow, deliberate rhythm, urging her to find her own. And for a brief, breathless instant, Emily's chest moved in time with his. Outside the glass, nurses and other doctors gathered, drawn by the commotion but held still by the fragile hope unfolding before them. Nobody dared to speak. The only sounds were the soft, labored breathing of the dog, the fading beep of the heart monitor, and the quiet sobs of a mother who refused to let go. As precious seconds slipped away, something shifted. Emily's oxygen levels, which had been falling, held steady. Her heartbeat, faint and chaotic just moments before, started to find a rhythm. The heart monitor still warned of danger, but the numbers stopped falling. Dr. Brooks blinked back tears, barely able to trust what she was seeing. It was as if Bailey's final act was keeping Emily tethered to life when nothing else could. But Bailey's strength was fading too. His chest heaved, and for the first time, the brave retriever looked tired, so heartbreakingly tired. Emily's tiny hand twitched, her fingers curling, as though reaching for her best friend. The doctors exchanged glances filled with equal parts fear and awe. No textbook, no study, had ever prepared them for what was happening. And just when it seemed like hope might win, Bailey's breathing grew uneven, the spark in his eyes starting to dim. Dr. Brooks pressed her hand to her chest, torn between stepping in and letting this moment play out. In those final seconds, Emily's parents leaned closer, whispering words of love, of courage, of goodbye or maybe, of hold on. Nobody knew what would happen next. The machines kept warning of disaster. The dog's strength was almost gone, and the girl's life hung by the thinnest of threads. But in that small ICU room, a bond stronger than science or fear kept fighting against the impossible. What happened in the next moments would leave even the most experienced doctors questioning everything they thought they knew about medicine, love, and the power that lives in a loyal heart. Long before that desperate night in the ICU, Emily and Bailey's story had started in a small, sunlit living room where a golden-furred puppy tumbled into the arms of a giggling girl. Mark and Lisa had brought Bailey home to celebrate Emily's 5th birthday, never imagining how deeply the dog would weave himself into their daughter's life. Back then, Emily's days were filled with laughter and scraped knees from backyard adventures, and Bailey followed her everywhere, his tail wagging like a metronome of happiness. Then, not long after Emily turned 11, came the fevers that wouldn't break, the bruises that appeared without cause, and the exhaustion that turned simple walks into impossible tasks. Tests and specialist visits followed until finally, the doctors named it a rare autoimmune disorder that seemed to wage war on Emily's own body. Treatments drained her strength, and soon the cheerful girl, who once chased Bailey around the yard, spent more time in a hospital bed than at home. Yet Bailey stayed beside her, his presence a quiet promise that she was never truly alone. The hospital staff quickly noticed Bailey wasn't just another pet. When Emily's pain spiked, Bailey would whine before the monitors even showed a change. If she was too weak to speak, Bailey would nudge her hand gently, until she remembered she wasn't fighting alone. His visits became the highlight of Emily's days. Even on the hardest mornings, her tired voice would whisper, "When can I see Bailey?" As Emily's illness worsened, Dr. Brooks found herself wrestling with more than medical charts. Over 2 decades of practicing medicine had taught her to trust science above all. But watching the bond between Emily and Bailey made her question where compassion fit into the picture. There were moments late at night, when the halls were quiet, and the machines hummed softly, that Dr. Brooks would pause outside Emily's room, quietly wondering if love really could reach where medicine could not. Meanwhile, Mark and Lisa clung to hope in the only way they knew how, by staying close and believing their daughter's fight wasn't over. Mark, usually so practical, began reading every article he could find about therapy dogs and unexplained recoveries. Lisa, who had always trusted doctors completely, found herself praying silently each night, asking for just one more morning where Emily could open her eyes. Their marriage, tested by fear and endless nights in waiting rooms, found unexpected strength in shared determination not to let go. Outside the family's struggle, the hospital itself buzzed with quiet speculation. Nurses exchanged stories about Emily's sudden bursts of strength after Bailey's visits. A few younger doctors whispered about the dog effect, half in awe, half afraid of sounding foolish. Even the hospital chaplain stopped by more often, drawn by something he couldn't name, but felt deeply whenever Bailey padded through the halls. As the weeks turned into months, Emily's condition hit a critical point. Her doctors tried new treatments, adjusted medications, and consulted specialists across the country, but the disease pushed back harder every time. Emily's once bright spirit seemed to fade, her laughter replaced by long silences and half-finished sentences. The only time light returned to her eyes was when Bailey entered the room, tail swishing softly, as if brushing away her fear. But behind every small victory lurked a truth none of them could ignore. Bailey was aging too. The once boundless retriever had started to slow, his muzzle graying, his steps more careful than before. Some nights, when the hospital lights dimmed, Bailey would rest his head on Emily's bed and close his eyes as if even his boundless love had limits. Mark noticed the change first, a hint of sadness in Bailey's gaze, but said nothing, afraid to steal what little hope Emily had left. Then came that fateful night, when Emily's vitals dropped faster than anyone had ever seen. Panic filled the room. Nurses moved quickly. Dr. Brooks barked orders, and Emily's parents could only watch, frozen by fear. Against every rule, Mark brought Bailey into the ICU, his voice hoarse with desperation. What mattered more now, a rule and a policy book or the one creature who had never let Emily down? In that fragile moment, as Bailey pressed his head against Emily's chest, the atmosphere in the ICU changed. Time seemed to stretch painfully thin. Nurses who had once shaken their heads at the idea of hope now stood silent, their eyes fixed on the girl and her dog. Dr. Brooks, always measured and logical, felt something inside her bend. She had been trained to rely on charts and medication, but what she saw before her wasn't in any textbook. Bailey's breathing grew slower, more deliberate, as if he was guiding Emily's lungs to remember how to draw breath. Emily's tiny hand twitched, the smallest spark of life in a body that had been fading. Machines still warned of danger, but the girl's breathing found a shaky rhythm, rising and falling with Bailey's. Mark squeezed Lisa's hand so tightly it hurt, silently, begging the moment to stretch longer, to give them even one more hour yet. Tension built in every corner of the room. Dr. Brooks struggled to decide whether to intervene, her professional instinct clashing with the human part of her that wanted desperately to believe in something bigger than medicine. The other doctors exchanged worried glances, silently questioning if they were witnessing a miracle or if hope was clouding their judgment. At the worst possible moment, Bailey, too, began to show signs of strain. His breathing grew ragged, his legs trembling as he kept his head on Emily's chest. The brave retriever had always seemed unbreakable to Emily, but now even she could see the effort etched in every breath he took. Emily's eyelids fluttered, her lips parting slightly, as though she could feel Bailey slipping away. And then, as if sensing the danger to both girl and dog, Dr. Brooks stepped closer, hand hovering near the emergency button. Her mind screamed to act, to save at least one life, but her heart whispered to wait, to let love do what medicine couldn't. Mark and Lisa barely dared to breathe, their eyes locked on their daughter and the dog, who had given her more hope than any doctor could. In those last seconds, before everything would change forever, the room held its breath, caught between fear and belief, science and something no one could explain. And as Bailey's gaze met Emily's one final time, the unthinkable was about to unfold, something that would leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about what truly keeps us alive. In that heavy silence, Bailey's body shuddered, as if every breath cost him something he didn't have to spare. Emily's chest rose and fell, fragile but steady, her small hand now resting on Bailey's fur. For one terrifying moment, it seemed as if both girl and dog might slip away together, tethered by a bond too deep for anyone to fully understand. Dr. Brooks' hand hovered over the emergency button, her heart racing with fear that if she waited even a second longer, she might lose them both. Then something unexpected happened. Emily's pulse, which had been so faint it barely registered, began to grow stronger. The heart monitor's alarm quieted, its relentless warning easing into a slower, steadier rhythm. Emily's lips parted and, with a faint breath, she whispered something no one else could hear. Bailey let out a quiet whine, his eyes softening, and for a brief second, it felt like time itself paused, just to witness the moment. Tears streamed down Lisa's face as she pressed her hand over her daughter's, whispering words of love and disbelief. Mark, who had tried so hard to stay strong, finally let his own tears fall, his shoulders shaking with relief and exhaustion. Nurses who had seen countless shifts and countless tragedies now stood rooted in place, unable to look away from the fragile miracle unfolding before them. Bailey's breathing slowed further, each inhale and exhale drawn out, as though he was willing every last bit of strength into Emily. Dr. Brooks, once so sure of what could and couldn't happen in medicine, felt her own certainty slip away. In that moment, she saw more than numbers on a screen. She saw hope, love, and something beyond what textbooks could teach. Emily's eyelids fluttered open, revealing a tired but unmistakable spark. Her gaze found Bailey's, and though she couldn't speak, her hand tightened just slightly on his fur. The machines that had been screaming moments before now kept a gentler rhythm, tracking a heartbeat that refused to give up. Dr. Brooks blinked away tears, quietly ordering a nurse to prepare new tests, still half doubting what she was seeing, but unwilling to dismiss it as impossible. But Bailey was fading. His chest barely moved now, each breath shallower than the last. Emily, still too weak to move more than her hand, let out a soft, broken sound, a sound that spoke of love and fear all at once. Bailey's eyes closed slowly, as if the sight of her alive and fighting had finally given him permission to rest. With one final exhale, the loyal retriever went still, his head still pressed gently against Emily's chest. For a moment, no one spoke. Even the machines seemed quieter, as if paying silent respect. Mark wrapped his arm around Lisa, both of them torn between heartbreak and overwhelming gratitude. Dr. Brooks stepped back, her professional mask slipping as she wiped her eyes, silently thanking Bailey for doing what medicine could not. Over the next few days, Emily's condition stabilized, beyond what anyone had dared hope. Test results that had once painted a grim picture now showed signs of improvement. Doctors still couldn't explain it fully, but every chart and scan confirmed the same impossible truth. Emily had been pulled back from the edge. The auto markers that had ravaged her body began to drop. And though her recovery was still fragile, it was undeniable. At Bailey's small memorial in the hospital courtyard, staff, patients, and Emily's family gathered to say goodbye. Emily, still too weak to stand for long, sat quietly in her wheelchair, holding a framed photo of the dog who had stayed by her side until his very last breath. Through her tears, she whispered thank you, a promise that she'd keep fighting not just for herself, but to honor the love that had saved her. Months passed, and Emily grew stronger. She returned home, the walls once quiet, now filled again with laughter, though always carrying the echo of Bailey's gentle presence. Mark and Lisa never forgot what they had witnessed, a moment that reminded them love can reach where medicine cannot, and Dr. Brooks, who had once believed miracles belonged only in stories, carried Bailey's memory into every patient's room, never again dismissing the power of hope. In the end, it wasn't just about Emily's survival or Bailey's final act. It was about the reminder that life is stitched together by invisible threads of love, loyalty, and sacrifice, things science can't measure, but everyone can feel. Emily's story, of a girl who had only minutes to live, and a dog whose final gift changed everything, became more than a headline. It became proof that sometimes the heart can do what medicine alone cannot. And though Bailey was gone, his love lived on in every breath Emily took, every smile she shared, and every heartbeat that refused to stop. And that, in the simplest words, is how a dog's final act made even the most experienced doctors question everything they thought they knew about what keeps us alive.